The young woman had been looking forward to this trip for months. It was not just any trip. It was an important journey for her career and personal growth. She had planned everything carefully, from packing her bag with precision to making sure she had all her documents ready. She was excited and a little nervous as she arrived at the airport early, wanting to avoid any last-minute stress. The bright morning sun reflected off the glass walls of the terminal, and she could hear the low hum of the bustling crowd moving past her. She took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anticipation and relief as she approached the check-in counter. Once she had checked in and received her boarding pass, she headed to the lounge. She enjoyed moments like this where everything felt calm before the journey began. The lounge was filled with travelers sipping coffee, reading newspapers, and quietly chatting with companions. She found a quiet corner, placed her bag next to her, and took a moment to just breathe and enjoy the comfort of being there. It was a rare chance to pause in her usually busy life. Soon it was time to board the plane. She walked down the gate with confidence, ready to take her seat in first class. She had worked hard to afford this experience, and she believed that everyone deserves a little comfort now and then. As she entered the cabin, she smiled at the flight attendants who greeted her warmly. The plush seats, soft lighting, and spacious environment immediately made her feel relaxed. She placed her bag carefully in the compartment above her head and settled into her seat, feeling a sense of satisfaction. The flight was just beginning, and she had a book in her hand to pass the time. She enjoyed reading during flights. It was a private space where she could think and reflect. She opened her book, immersing herself in the story, when she noticed a woman approaching her. The woman had a stern look on her face and seemed upset. She stopped in front of her seat, looking her up and down, and said sharply, asking why she was sitting there. The young woman was surprised and a little taken aback. She had her boarding pass in her hand, which clearly indicated her seat number in first class. She replied politely, showing the ticket and explaining that she was seated correctly. But the woman did not seem satisfied. Her tone became louder, almost demanding, as she insisted that the young woman move to another section of the plane. Passengers nearby started to notice the tension, glancing over with curiosity and concern. The young woman tried to remain calm, feeling a mixture of shock and disbelief. She had never experienced such open hostility in a place where she should have felt safe and comfortable. She wanted to respond with words that would shut down the confrontation, but she also wanted to avoid escalating the situation. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and tried to speak calmly, explaining again that she had every right to be in her seat. Despite her efforts, the woman continued, repeating that she did not belong there and that the cabin was not the right place for her. The other passengers began whispering among themselves, some shaking their heads, others unsure whether to intervene. The young woman felt a mix of humiliation and anger. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, but she reminded herself to stay composed. She did not want to give the woman the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. She sat quietly, her mind racing as she considered what to do next. The flight attendants stepped in, attempting to calm the situation. They asked for her boarding pass again, double-checking her seat assignment. After a moment, they confirmed that she was indeed in the correct seat. The young woman was relieved that the staff recognized the truth, but the other woman was still insistent, her voice loud enough for several passengers to hear. It was a stressful and awkward moment, and the young woman felt all eyes on her. She realized that leaving the seat might be easier than continuing the argument. She did not want to be the cause of more disturbance on the flight. With a heavy heart, she stood up and took her bag, moving toward the economy section, feeling a deep sense of frustration. She kept her head high, refusing to cry or show that she had been shaken. Even though she had been pushed out of first class unfairly, she refused to let the moment define her. She walked past the seats, each step feeling heavier than the last, but she reminded herself of her strength and resilience. Once she reached her new seat in the economy section, she sat down and tried to collect herself. Her heart was still racing and her hands trembled slightly as she put down her bag. She felt the unfairness of the situation deeply. It was not just about being moved from a comfortable seat. It was about being treated as if she did not belong because of who she was. She looked around, noticing the subtle glances from other passengers, some sympathetic, some indifferent. She focused on taking slow breaths, trying to calm her mind. She thought about how often people like her faced moments like this. She recalled incidents from her past where she had been judged unfairly or treated with prejudice. Each memory stung, but she reminded herself that she had overcome those moments and grown stronger each time. She opened her book again, but the words blurred on the page. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the confrontation, replaying the scene in her mind. She wondered how someone could be so cruel and judgmental over something so trivial. After a while, she put the book down and looked out of the airplane window. The clouds floated by, serene and calm, and for a brief moment she felt a sense of peace. She realized that no matter how unfair the world could be, she had the power to control her own reactions. She could not change the behavior of the woman who had insulted her, but she could choose how to respond and how to carry herself. That thought gave her a small measure of comfort. She also thought about her family, who had always taught her the importance of dignity and grace. She remembered her father's words about handling adversity with patience and courage. Even though he was not with her on the flight, she felt his presence in her mind. She knew that he would be proud of her for staying calm and composed, despite the humiliation. That thought strengthened her resolve and reminded her that she was more than the prejudice she faced. As the plane continued its journey, she focused on her own plans and goals. She reminded herself that one unpleasant encounter did not define her life or her worth. She reflected on the importance of resilience, patience, and maintaining self-respect in difficult situations. The young woman knew that challenges like this were part of life, but how she responded to them would shape her character. Despite the discomfort, she noticed small acts of kindness around her. A flight attendant offered her a smile and a gentle word of encouragement. Another passenger quietly handed her a bottle of water, acknowledging the stress she had endured. These small gestures reminded her that there were always people who treated others with respect and empathy. It was a subtle reminder that while cruelty existed, kindness could also be found in unexpected places. As the flight continued, she began to relax slightly, letting go of some of the tension she had carried. She realized that the experience, though painful, was also a lesson in patience, courage, and self-awareness. She promised herself that she would not let it overshadow her journey or her accomplishments. She focused on the excitement of reaching her destination, the opportunities that awaited her, and the people she would meet. She reminded herself that she was capable, strong, and deserving of every good thing that life had to offer. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, she had regained some of her composure. She knew that the story of the confrontation would stay with her for a while, but she also understood that it was only a moment in a larger journey. She looked around the cabin, taking note of the passengers quietly going about their own travels, and she felt a renewed sense of determination. She was not defined by the prejudice of others. She was defined by her own actions, strength, and integrity. As the hours passed, she allowed herself to think about how she could use this experience to grow. She considered writing about it later, sharing her story to inspire others who might face similar prejudice. She also thought about the importance of empathy, understanding, and the need to challenge injustice when it arose. These reflections brought her a sense of purpose and clarity, helping her move past the anger and humiliation. By the time the flight was halfway over, she felt a sense of calm return. She had navigated the confrontation with dignity, had remained composed, and had found ways to process the experience. She knew that the journey was far from over, but she also understood that she had already taken an important step in handling adversity with grace. The young woman settled into her seat, focusing on her own thoughts, plans, and aspirations, ready to continue the journey with strength and confidence. The young woman sat in her new seat in economy, trying to regain her composure after the humiliation she had faced in first class. Her heart was still heavy with frustration, but she reminded herself that she was strong and capable of handling this. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her, some curious, some sympathetic, but she tried not to let that distract her. She focused on taking deep breaths and allowing herself a moment of peace. She had been through difficult situations before, and she knew how to stay calm when challenged. As she settled into her seat, she thought about the confrontation again. The woman who had demanded she leave first class had been loud, rude, and clearly prejudiced. The young woman replayed the words in her mind, wondering why someone could be so cruel over something so small. She felt a wave of anger, but she refused to let it control her. She reminded herself that keeping her dignity intact was more important than responding with anger. Nearby passengers were watching, and she noticed a few whispering quietly to each other. Some looked concerned, some looked uncomfortable, and a few seemed to admire her restraint. She felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. She didn't like the attention, but she appreciated the silent support. It reminded her that there were people in the world who recognized injustice when they saw it, even if they didn't always intervene. She tried to distract herself by looking out of the window. The clouds moved slowly below and the sun reflected off their edges, creating patterns that were almost hypnotic. She allowed herself to focus on the beauty outside, letting her mind drift away from the confrontation. She thought about the places she would visit, the people she would meet, and the opportunities waiting for her. The excitement of the journey began to replace some of the frustration she had felt. Despite the effort to distract herself, the memory of the incident lingered. She thought about how often people made assumptions based on appearances and how unfairly she had been treated. She had always been aware of prejudice in the world, but facing it so directly had been jarring. She realized that situations like this could either break a person or make them stronger. She chose to let it make her stronger. The flight attendants moved quietly through the cabin, checking on passengers and offering refreshments. One of them stopped briefly near her seat, giving her a reassuring smile. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. It reminded her that not everyone supported the rude behavior she had endured. She thanked the attendant silently and tried to focus on the flight, reminding herself that she was still on her way to something important. As the plane settled into cruising altitude, she noticed the woman who had humiliated her earlier had returned to her seat in first class. She watched from a distance, noting the smug expression on the woman's face as if nothing had happened. The young woman felt a flicker of irritation, but she pushed it aside. She refused to let the other person's behavior dictate her emotions. She reminded herself that the only power the woman had was the power she allowed her to have. She pulled out her notebook and began to write down her thoughts. Writing had always helped her process difficult emotions. She detailed the encounter, describing the words, the tone, and her feelings. She wrote not to shame anyone, but to make sense of the experience for herself. As she wrote, she felt some of the tension release. Putting her thoughts on paper allowed her to regain a sense of control and clarity. She also reflected on the reactions of other passengers. Some had tried to intervene quietly, while others had watched in silence. She thought about the small ways people could show support, even without speaking up loudly. She appreciated these subtle gestures, realizing that not every act of courage needed to be public. Sometimes just acknowledging the unfairness of a situation was enough to make a difference. The young woman then considered the larger picture. She thought about her life, her family, and the values that had been instilled in her. Her parents had always taught her the importance of standing tall in the face of adversity, of treating others with respect, and of maintaining integrity, even when confronted with unfairness. She realized that this situation, as painful as it had been, was a lesson in resilience and self-respect. She felt a quiet sense of pride in the way she had handled it. As the hours passed, she noticed small acts of kindness around her. A passenger offered to help someone with luggage. A child apologized to a stranger for bumping into them. And a flight attendant moved efficiently through the cabin, ensuring everyone was comfortable. These small moments reminded her that humanity had many faces, and that while cruelty existed, kindness could be found in unexpected places. She felt reassured that the world was not entirely defined by the worst moments she had experienced. Despite the attempt to focus on positive thoughts, the humiliation of being forced out of first class lingered. She thought about how unfair the world could be, and how often people were judged based on appearances or assumptions. She felt a sense of determination growing inside her. She would not allow this incident to define her or dampen her spirit. Instead, she would use it as motivation to continue striving for her goals and to remain steadfast in her values. She began to plan how she would handle similar situations in the future. She thought about speaking up more assertively, seeking support when needed, and maintaining her composure under pressure. She realized that experiences like this could serve as preparation for challenges in life, helping her build confidence and resilience. She felt empowered by the realization that she had already navigated a difficult situation successfully. The flight continued, and she allowed herself to relax gradually. She took short walks down the aisle, stretched her legs, and spoke briefly with passengers who smiled at her warmly. These interactions reminded her that connection and empathy existed even in fleeting moments. She felt a sense of community, however small, among the people around her. It gave her hope and strengthened her resolve to approach life with positivity. As the young woman looked around the cabin, she noticed that some passengers were discreetly talking about the earlier incident. She didn't mind the attention. In fact, she appreciated that people recognized the injustice. She realized that sometimes the impact of witnessing unfairness could be just as meaningful as intervening directly. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she had maintained her dignity and composure, setting an example for others without needing to make a scene. She then reflected on the importance of self-care in difficult situations. She sipped water slowly, took deep breaths, and allowed herself moments of quiet reflection. She understood that handling prejudice required not only courage but also care for oneself. She promised herself that she would continue to nurture her mental and emotional well-being, no matter the challenges she faced. The young woman also thought about her goals and aspirations. She reminded herself that one unpleasant encounter would not deter her from pursuing her dreams. She visualized the opportunities ahead, the work she wanted to accomplish, and the people she hoped to meet. This focus on the future brought a sense of excitement and energy, replacing some of the negativity from earlier. She felt motivated to continue her journey with confidence and purpose. As the flight neared its halfway point, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. She had learned the importance of patience, the value of maintaining composure, and the power of self-respect. She had also seen the significance of subtle acts of kindness and empathy from strangers. These insights strengthened her understanding of human behavior and the ways in which people navigate challenges. Despite the difficulty of the earlier confrontation, she found herself feeling grateful for the experience. It had tested her strength and resilience, and she had risen to the challenge. She felt a renewed sense of self-assurance, knowing that she could face adversity with dignity. She also felt more aware of the impact of her actions on others and the importance of modeling grace in difficult situations. By the time the plane reached a steady cruising altitude, the young woman felt a sense of calm and focus. She had processed her emotions, reflected on her values, and regained her composure. She knew that the journey ahead would continue to present challenges, but she felt ready to face them. She was determined to approach life with confidence, integrity, and empathy, using her experiences to grow stronger and wiser. She glanced around the cabin one last time, noticing passengers quietly going about their own travels. She felt a sense of connection, understanding that everyone had their own stories and challenges. This perspective helped her feel less isolated in her experience and more appreciative of the shared human experience. She settled back into her seat, ready to continue the journey with a renewed sense of purpose and resilience, knowing that she had already overcome one of the most challenging moments of the flight. The young woman sat back in her seat, feeling the gentle hum of the airplane beneath her. She had spent the first part of the flight reflecting on the confrontation and trying to regain her composure. Now she felt a quiet determination growing inside her. She realized that although the incident had been painful, it had also revealed her strength. She had handled the situation with dignity and patience, and she was proud of herself for that. As she looked around, she noticed passengers quietly going about their own activities. Some were reading, some were working on laptops, and a few were talking softly with their travel companions. She observed the subtle interactions between people, noticing kindness in small gestures. A passenger holding a bag for an elderly traveler, a child offering a seat to someone, a flight attendant patiently answering questions. These small acts of consideration reminded her that the world was not entirely unkind, and that even in moments of tension, there were people who acted with empathy and respect. Her thoughts then turned inward. She began to reflect on her life and the values that had been instilled in her. Her parents had always emphasized the importance of integrity, patience, and respect for oneself and others. She thought about the lessons she had learned from them, and how those lessons had helped her navigate the difficult situation earlier. She realized that she had internalized these values deeply, and they had guided her actions without her even thinking consciously about them. She reached for her notebook again and began to write. Writing helped her process her emotions, and she found comfort in putting her thoughts on paper. She detailed the confrontation, but this time she focused on her reactions rather than the words of the other woman. She wrote about her initial shock, her frustration, and the effort it took to remain calm. She also wrote about the sense of empowerment she felt afterward, knowing that she had handled herself with grace. As she wrote, the tension in her chest slowly began to ease, The young woman thought about how often people were judged unfairly, based on their appearance, their race, or other superficial factors. She realized that the incident on the plane was just one example of a larger issue, one that many people faced every day.
She felt a mixture of sadness and resolve.
It was disheartening to see prejudice in action, but she also felt motivated to be part of the change. She wanted to show others that it was possible to respond to injustice with strength and dignity, without resorting to anger or aggression. She glanced at the other passengers, noticing a few who had witnessed the earlier confrontation. Some of them were whispering quietly, their expressions showing curiosity or surprise. She felt a sense of quiet pride knowing that she had maintained her composure in front of them. She realized that her actions, even if subtle, could leave an impression on others. It was a reminder that personal strength often spoke louder than words. The young woman also began to think about her own aspirations and goals. She reminded herself that one unpleasant encounter would not deter her from pursuing her dreams. She envisioned the opportunities ahead, the work she wanted to accomplish, and the people she hoped to meet. Focusing on her goals helped her regain a sense of control and purpose. She felt energized by the thought of continuing her journey with determination and confidence. As the flight continued, she noticed a few small interactions that lifted her spirits. A flight attendant offered a warm smile as they passed by, a passenger helped another retrieve an item from the overhead compartment, and a child shared their snack with a friend. These simple moments of kindness reminded her that empathy and consideration existed in everyday life. She felt a renewed sense of hope, realizing that while cruelty could be present, it was balanced by acts of compassion. Despite these positive observations, the young woman could not completely shake the memory of the confrontation. She thought about the other woman's arrogance and prejudice, and she felt a flicker of irritation. But she reminded herself that harboring anger would only weigh her down. Instead, she chose to focus on what she could control, her own reactions, her own mindset, and the way she carried herself. She felt a quiet sense of empowerment knowing that she had the ability to rise above negativity. She reflected on the lessons she had learned from the experience. She had learned that maintaining composure in the face of prejudice was a form of strength. She had learned that quiet dignity could speak volumes, even in the absence of confrontation. She had also learned that self-respect was not dependent on the opinions of others, but on the way she chose to treat herself. These insights gave her a sense of clarity and direction. As the hours passed, she allowed herself to relax more fully. She stretched her legs, sipped water, and occasionally looked out the window at the clouds below. The serene view helped her clear her mind and focus on the positive aspects of the journey. She felt a sense of calm returning, as if the weight of the earlier confrontation was slowly lifting. She reminded herself that this experience, while difficult, was a small part of a much larger journey. The young woman also considered the importance of self-care in challenging situations. She took moments to breathe deeply, to reflect quietly, and to acknowledge her own feelings. She understood that resilience was not just about enduring hardship, but also about caring for oneself and nurturing inner strength. She felt a renewed commitment to maintaining her emotional well-being, knowing that it was essential for navigating the challenges ahead. She thought about the reactions of others during the confrontation. Some had tried to intervene while others had watched quietly. She realized that even passive acknowledgement could have a meaningful impact. People noticed how she handled herself, and her composure set an example. She felt a sense of responsibility to continue demonstrating grace and integrity, not for the approval of others, but as a reflection of her own values. The young woman also reflected on the broader social context of the incident. She thought about the ways in which prejudice and discrimination affected people every day, and how these experiences could shape self-perception and confidence. She felt empathy for those who had faced similar challenges, and a desire to contribute to positive change. She understood that standing up against injustice could take many forms, including setting an example through one's actions. As the flight progressed, she began to imagine how she might share her experience in the future. She considered writing an article, speaking to others about her journey, or simply using the lessons she had learned to guide her interactions with people. She felt a sense of purpose in transforming a negative experience into an opportunity for growth and awareness. The thought of helping others navigate similar challenges brought her a sense of fulfillment. She also thought about the irony of the situation. The woman who had humiliated her had no idea who she really was or what her background entailed. She felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her true identity and achievements were her own, and that they did not need to be validated by anyone else. This realization reinforced her sense of self-worth and confidence. The young woman continued to write in her notebook, capturing her reflections, insights, and emotions. She wrote about the strength it took to remain composed, the lessons she had learned, and the sense of empowerment she felt. Writing became a form of therapy, helping her process the experience and solidify the growth she had achieved. Each word she wrote reinforced her determination to face the world with resilience and dignity. As the flight neared the halfway point, she felt a renewed sense of focus and clarity. She understood that the journey was ongoing, both literally and metaphorically. She had faced adversity, reflected on her values, and emerged stronger. She felt prepared to continue her journey with confidence, knowing that she could navigate challenges with grace and integrity. The young woman looked around the cabin one more time, observing the subtle interactions and quiet moments of connection among passengers. She felt a sense of belonging, even in a transient space like an airplane. She understood that while the world could be unjust at times, it was also filled with moments of kindness, empathy, and understanding. These observations reinforced her sense of hope and optimism. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, she had fully regained her composure. She felt a deep sense of pride in herself for handling the confrontation with dignity. She knew that the experience would remain with her, but she also knew that it had strengthened her character and reinforced her values. She felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident in her ability to maintain grace, resilience, and self-respect. The young woman had spent most of the flight reflecting on herself and the confrontation, but as the hours passed, she noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere around her. Passengers who had been quietly observing earlier seemed to be speaking in hushed tones. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of people looking in her direction, some with expressions that suggested curiosity or surprise. She tried not to let it distract her, reminding herself that she had no control over others' perceptions and that her own composure was what mattered. As she adjusted in her seat, she noticed a flight attendant approaching with a professional but gentle demeanor. The attendant handed her a note discreetly, asking if she could speak with her briefly. Curious but calm, she accepted and followed the attendant to a quieter section of the cabin. There, the attendant spoke softly, asking if she was comfortable and if there had been any issues earlier. The young woman nodded politely and explained the incident, keeping her voice steady. The attendant listened carefully, expressing understanding and concern. This small act of acknowledgement brought her a sense of relief and validation, knowing that someone recognized the unfairness of what had occurred. After returning to her seat, she noticed the woman who had humiliated her earlier was now acting noticeably uncomfortable. She saw her glance repeatedly toward the economy section, her posture stiff and tense. It became apparent that the other passengers were starting to discuss the incident among themselves, and the woman's earlier confidence seemed to be slipping. The young woman felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, but reminded herself to remain composed. She did not need to react or boast. The situation would reveal itself naturally. A few minutes later, a passenger in first class approached the young woman discreetly, introducing themselves as someone who knew her family. They mentioned her father's name, and the young woman felt a brief moment of surprise. She had always valued her independence and had rarely relied on her family's reputation in public spaces. However, the passenger's words hinted at something significant. She realized that the other woman had no idea of her true background or the prominence of her family. The realization brought a mix of emotions. On one hand, she felt a sense of irony. Someone who had treated her unfairly had no understanding of her identity or achievements. On the other hand, she felt a quiet pride in the life she had built for herself, independent of external validation. She maintained her calm demeanor, understanding that the moment would speak for itself without her needing to intervene. As the flight continued, whispers began circulating among passengers. It became clear that the revelation of her family connection had reached others, including some in first class. The woman who had demanded she leave earlier now seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. Her earlier confidence had transformed into visible discomfort, and she appeared uncertain how to act. The young woman observed silently, feeling a sense of justice in the natural unfolding of events. She reflected on the irony of the moment. The woman who had tried to assert superiority over her had no idea who she truly was. The young woman had been judged based on appearances and assumptions, yet her own composure and dignity had remained intact. This contrast highlighted the folly of prejudice and the power of self-respect. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the truth had revealed itself without any need for confrontation or anger. The young woman also thought about the reactions of other passengers. Many of them had been witnesses to the earlier confrontation, and now seemed to be quietly acknowledging the shift in dynamics. Some offered subtle nods or smiles, recognizing her composure and integrity. She felt a sense of connection with these strangers, understanding that shared recognition of fairness and dignity could create unspoken bonds. It was a reminder that people often valued honesty and grace, even when circumstances were tense. As the hours passed, she began to process the implications of the revelation. The knowledge that her family's status had inadvertently influenced the perception of others was intriguing. She had worked hard to achieve her own accomplishments, independent of her background, but she realized that the incident had highlighted a societal truth. Identity and privilege could sometimes shift the balance of perception. She considered the nuances of fairness, justice, and human behavior, gaining insight into the complexity of social interactions. The young woman also contemplated the lessons of patience and resilience that the incident had reinforced. She had maintained her composure despite humiliation, navigated the situation with quiet dignity, and allowed circumstances to reveal the truth. She realized that these qualities were invaluable, not only in moments of confrontation but in everyday life. The experience had strengthened her character and deepened her understanding of human dynamics. She continued to write in her notebook, capturing her thoughts and reflections. She wrote about the irony of the situation, the satisfaction of seeing justice unfold naturally, and the importance of maintaining integrity under pressure. Writing helped her process the emotions she felt, pride, relief, and a quiet sense of triumph, while also reinforcing the lessons she had learned. Each word she wrote solidified her understanding of the power of composure and self-respect. As the plane approached the final hours of the flight, the atmosphere around her shifted further. The woman who had humiliated her earlier now seemed subdued, avoiding eye contact and speaking less confidently. Passengers who had witnessed the earlier tension were more aware of the young woman's composure and integrity. The young woman observed these subtle changes without judgment, simply noting the contrast between past and present behaviors. She felt a sense of calm satisfaction, knowing that the truth had emerged naturally. She also thought about the broader implications of the experience. Prejudice and unfair judgment were pervasive issues, and moments like these highlighted the need for awareness, empathy, and respect. She considered how she could use her own experiences to inspire others, demonstrating that resilience and dignity were powerful tools in the face of adversity. She felt a sense of purpose and understanding, that personal strength could influence the perception of others and encourage fairness. The young woman reflected on her family and the lessons she had learned from them. Her father's influence had shaped her values, emphasizing integrity, empathy, and perseverance. Although she had largely navigated her life independently, the incident reminded her of the guidance and principles instilled in her from a young age. She felt gratitude for the foundation her family had provided, knowing that it had contributed to the strength she displayed during the confrontation. As the plane continued its journey, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about the irony, the lessons learned, and the subtle ways in which dignity and integrity could influence others. She felt a sense of empowerment, understanding that true strength lay in maintaining composure, treating others with respect, and allowing the truth to unfold naturally. She knew that these qualities would serve her well in future challenges. The young woman noticed small interactions around the cabin that further reinforced her reflections. Passengers offered smiles, brief conversations, and gestures of consideration. These moments reminded her that human connection and empathy could exist even in fleeting encounters. She felt reassured that her composure and integrity had been recognized and appreciated, even by those who had only observed quietly. As the flight neared its final destination, she felt a sense of closure regarding the incident. The confrontation had revealed the unfairness of prejudice, highlighted the power of dignity, and ultimately demonstrated that composure and integrity could command respect. She felt proud of the way she had handled the situation and confident that the experience would serve as a meaningful lesson in her life. She continued to write, documenting the final reflections and insights she had gained from the flight. She captured the irony, the lessons in resilience, and the subtle shifts in perception among passengers. Writing allowed her to solidify the understanding that she had grown from the experience, gaining a deeper appreciation for patience, composure, and the impact of personal integrity. By the time the plane began its descent, the young woman felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. She had navigated a challenging situation, maintained her dignity, and allowed the truth to emerge without confrontation. She reflected on the journey not only as a physical trip, but also as an emotional and personal journey. The lessons she had learned would remain with her, guiding her in future interactions and challenges. As the wheels of the plane touched down, she felt ready to face the world beyond the flight. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident in her ability to handle adversity. The incident had tested her patience and resilience, but she had emerged with a deeper understanding of human behavior, fairness, and the importance of maintaining integrity. She gathered her belongings, took a final look around the cabin, and prepared to continue her journey, carrying with her the strength and lessons of the experience. The young woman stepped off the plane, her suitcase rolling smoothly beside her. She had arrived at her destination, and the journey had not only taken her across the skies, but had also carried her through a landscape of emotions she had never expected. The events on the flight lingered in her mind, but now, with the plane behind her, she felt a sense of closure and newfound strength. She moved with calm confidence, her posture reflecting the dignity she had maintained throughout the ordeal. People hustled past her in the airport terminal, voices blending into a background hum. She observed the movement with a sense of detachment, reflecting on the irony of the situation that had unfolded in the air just hours earlier. The woman who had forced her out of first class had acted with arrogance, assuming superiority where none existed. Yet now, the reality of her identity and her family's status had subtly shifted perceptions. It was a quiet, unspoken form of justice that needed no confrontation or words. She paused near the baggage claim, taking a moment to collect herself. Her thoughts returned to the reactions of the passengers on the plane. Some had whispered among themselves. Others had smiled or nodded, acknowledging her composure and dignity. These small gestures, though subtle, had offered her comfort and validation. They reminded her that fairness and respect could exist even in small, fleeting moments. The incident, she realized, had become more than an encounter. It was a lesson in human behavior, perception, and patience. As she waited for her luggage, she reflected on how people's assumptions often shape their behavior. The woman in first class had judged her based solely on appearance, making harsh and unfair decisions without knowing anything about her background or character. The young woman recognized that prejudice was a pervasive issue, but she also understood the power of maintaining grace under pressure. By staying calm and dignified, she had quietly asserted her worth, demonstrating that integrity and resilience could speak louder than anger or confrontation. When her suitcase appeared on the conveyor belt, she grabbed it and moved toward the exit. She passed through the airport, blending into the flow of travelers, but her mind remained active, replaying the events and considering the lessons she had learned. She thought about how this incident might influence her future interactions. She resolved to continue demonstrating patience, kindness, and composure, understanding that these qualities could guide her in moments of challenge and tension. Outside the terminal, the cool air was refreshing. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs and ease the lingering tension in her chest. She had handled a situation that could have left her feeling powerless, and she now felt a sense of empowerment. She recognized that dignity was a form of strength that did not require validation from others. Her own sense of self-worth had remained intact, and that was what mattered most. She walked toward a waiting car, reflecting on the irony that her father's identity had played a role in how the situation was ultimately perceived. She had lived much of her life independently, building her own path without relying on her family's status, but she understood that this revelation had created an additional layer of consequence for the woman who had treated her unfairly. It was a reminder that actions often have unforeseen outcomes, and that sometimes justice unfolds quietly, without the need for confrontation or retaliation. As she settled into the car, She thought about the broader implications of the incident. Prejudice and unfair judgment were issues she had seen in many aspects of life. Yet she realized that her response to these challenges could influence not only her own experience, but also the perceptions of those around her. She understood that resilience, grace, and composure were not just personal qualities. They could serve as subtle examples of integrity and fairness for others to observe. The drive through the city offered her time to continue reflecting. She considered how moments like this, though difficult, could provide opportunities for growth. She had faced humiliation and prejudice, but had responded in a way that reinforced her values and self-respect. The experience had strengthened her understanding of herself, her patience, and her ability to navigate adversity. She felt grateful for the lessons learned, even as she acknowledged the discomfort of the moment. She also thought about the impact the incident might have on others. Passengers on the plane had witnessed her composure, and some had quietly recognized the unfairness of the situation. She realized that by maintaining dignity, she had set an example for others, showing that strength could be expressed through calm and measured actions. This reflection gave her a sense of purpose, reinforcing her commitment to approach challenges with patience and integrity in the future. Arriving at her destination, she stepped out of the car and looked around at the unfamiliar city streets. The experience on the plane felt like a distant memory now, though its lessons were deeply embedded in her mind. She felt a sense of readiness to embrace the opportunities ahead, carrying with her the insights gained from the confrontation and the revelation of her identity. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she felt equipped to handle them with grace and resilience. She checked into her hotel, taking a moment to settle in before attending to the purpose of her trip. Her thoughts drifted back to the incident one last time, and she smiled faintly at the memory of the woman's discomfort once the truth had emerged. She recognized that justice did not always need to be loud or aggressive. Sometimes it manifested quietly, through patience, dignity, and the natural unfolding of truth. The experience had reinforced her belief in the power of composure and self-respect. As she unpacked her belongings, she reflected on the lessons learned and how they might shape her future actions. She resolved to continue navigating life with integrity, demonstrating kindness and understanding even in difficult situations. She recognized that her response to prejudice and unfair treatment could influence her own growth and the perceptions of those around her. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, motivated to approach challenges with confidence and empathy. Later, she took a walk through the city streets, observing the people around her and the subtle interactions that made up daily life. She noticed gestures of kindness, moments of empathy, and instances of consideration that reminded her of the positive aspects of human nature. These observations reinforced her belief that while prejudice existed, it was balanced by acts of compassion and fairness. She felt reassured that the world contained both challenges and opportunities for understanding. During the walk, she thought about how the incident might inspire her to help others who faced similar challenges. She considered writing about her experience, sharing her reflections, and offering guidance on maintaining composure and dignity in the face of adversity. She recognized that her journey, though personal, had lessons that could resonate with others and provide encouragement and insight. This realization brought a sense of fulfillment and purpose. As evening approached, she returned to her hotel and took time to rest. She allowed herself to reflect quietly, appreciating the resilience she had shown and the growth she had achieved. The events on the flight had tested her patience, composure, and understanding of human behavior. She had emerged with a deeper awareness of her own strength and the subtle ways in which integrity could influence others. She felt a sense of satisfaction in knowing that she had navigated the situation with grace. Before going to sleep, she wrote in her notebook one final time for the day. She captured her reflections, lessons, and feelings about the journey, the confrontation, and the revelation of her identity. Writing allowed her to process the experience fully, solidifying the insights she had gained. She felt grateful for the opportunity to reflect and for the strength she had discovered within herself. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt a quiet sense of empowerment. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also understood that she had the tools to navigate them with composure, patience, and dignity. The experience on the flight had been difficult, yet it had offered valuable lessons in resilience, self-respect, and the subtle power of integrity. She felt ready to face whatever lay ahead, confident in her ability to maintain grace and strength in any situation. In the days that followed, she carried the lessons of the flight with her. She approached interactions with a renewed sense of awareness, patience, and understanding. She found that maintaining composure and integrity not only influenced her own experience but also inspired others to act with empathy and fairness. She recognized that her response to challenges could serve as an example, demonstrating the quiet strength that comes from dignity and self-respect. Reflecting on the journey, she felt proud of the way she had handled the confrontation. She had faced humiliation and prejudice, yet she had emerged with her composure intact and a deeper understanding of human behavior. She knew that life would continue to test her, but she felt equipped to meet challenges with confidence, patience, and grace. The experience had strengthened her character, reinforced her values, and inspired her to continue navigating the world with empathy and integrity.